Without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady for Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a break, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Director Wray, for your presence here. Thank you to the men and women of the FBI in particular for the work that you've done on gun violence and as well the work that you've done in keeping Americans safe. Let me very quickly move on some issues that have been made a chief part of the work of our friends on the other side of the aisle. Republican members of this committee have spent much time of this Congress claiming that various aspects of the U.S. government have been weaponized against the American people. Director Wray, are you or your staff or auxiliaries weaponizing the FBI against the American people?
Absolutely not.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you as well for your civil rights work and emphasize that in addition, there have been representations that the FBI exaggerates domestic terrorism reports or data. Certainly, January 6th had its many different storytellers, but that was an act of domestic terrorism. I don't know how you could have exaggerated that as evidenced by the special congressional committee we had. But let's just think of domestic terrorism as it relates to the good men and women of our law enforcement. Take an example in February 2020 in Texas, where a white supremacist was engaged in conspiracy involving swatting, a harassment tactic, and all of the emergency services showed up over and over again. Does domestic terrorism impact negatively and dangerously on America's law enforcement and first responders?
Absolutely, and sometimes law enforcement are themselves the intended victims or targets of domestic violent extremism.
Though you have good, committed individuals, does the critique is legitimate? That's our job. But does the constant condemnation impact on morale of FBI personnel or those trying to join the FBI?
Well, look, our people are human beings, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers, really their lives to, unfairly criticized. But I will tell you, as I said in my opening statement, that the good news is our people are also tough and resilient. Our attrition is in the low single digits and would be the envy of almost any employer, and our recruiting, unlike what's happening in law enforcement more generally, is actually up very significantly.
Thank you, and I look forward to it being diverse. Let me start with our whistleblower journey here. Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Serapin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. The committee heard testimony that Mr. Serapin was suspended after he mishandled his service weapon and then said he wanted to use 2 female FBI executives as shooting targets. That was testimony of Jennifer Moore, HR under Human Resources under oath from the FBI. Mr. Serapin describes himself as a congressional whistleblower, but committee Republicans will not tell us whether he has been in contact with them. Are you familiar with former FBI agents Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen?
Again, I'm familiar with the names.
Thank you. O'Boyle was suspended for accessing information about an ongoing case and then leaking to the press, and Allen was suspended for interfering in the investigation of a January 6th suspect. Both Allen and O'Boyle testified before the Weaponization Committee in May. Were you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
I think they are clearly there for all friends and family to see. I assume they wanted to be seen. Do you know who Kash Patel is, if you know?
Yes, I know who he is.
He's an aide to President Trump, isn't he? Or was an aide? Or is an aide to President Trump?
Well, he was an individual who served in a number of different roles, both up here on the Hill and in the executive branch.
Thank you. Here's another picture. It's the checks that Serapin sent to both O'Boyle and Allen. Each check was for $255,194. Let me say that again. These men were paid $255,194 after they testified as so-called whistleblowers. And it should be noted that it says here, as it says, for holding the line. Director, at the time that Serapin and Patel gave Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen these checks, do you happen to know if they were still employees of the FBI?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
If they were, 5 CFR 2635, and I'd appreciate if we could get an answer in writing after you go back, whether they were or not, prohibits FBI employees from accepting cash gifts, doesn't it?
Well, there are a whole number of rules that would apply to this. Again, I don't want to weigh in on a specific personnel
But if
matter.
they were, that rule applies about cash gifts.
I'm not aware of a situation in which they could
No,
appropriately
but
accept
just
cash
generally,
gifts.
just generally,
Oh.
if that applies to FBI agents about not taking cash gifts, is that correct?
There are definitely rules that apply to special agents
Thank you,
accepting
Mr.
cash gifts.
Let me just finish this. Can you explain why an FBI agent should not receive cash? But let me move to one that I think is extremely important. Mr. Chairman, just a moment. And here is what I think is most interesting piece of this whole puzzle. O'Boyle and Allen are represented by an outfit called Empower Oversight.
Time's
Empower
expired.
Oversight is run by former Republican staffers. Do you know who else Empower Oversight might represent
I
in
do
any
not.
way?
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Let me just
Gentlelady's time
conclude.
expired.
Thank you so very much.
Respond.
Thank you. The so-called IRS whistleblower who Jim Jordan had relied upon. But does anyone need any further proof that these allegations are ginned up, corrupt political stunts advanced by those who don't want to see us follow the law? Finally, Mr. Chairman, here's another person who wants to join you on the 702, but the FBI has begun major reforms, and I think we should recognize that. You've been very kind. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just point out, my guess is they got the money because they wanted the money because they were trying to feed their family.
They actually haven't received the money. I have unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman, of a tweet Matthew Foldy put out here during this hearing. Right off the bat, Jerry Nadler lies about whistleblower getting $250,000. He says here, Marcus Allen has not received $250,000. He has not received or cashed the check that Kyle Seraphin posted online. Enter that in the record.